just to help things along here so people can hear, for the Q&A session, we have a wireless mic over here with Suhei. She's going to just, if you have a question, please come up to her. I know for some of you sitting over here, it's a pain in the butt to get around, but that way everyone can hear your question and then we can answer it. Some of this is being recorded, so for the sake of our recordings, we also just use the mic, so it makes it into the recording. Because a lot of people will come back and see a Q&A session video after we put it up on YouTube, and they get a lot out of it, because a lot of you will ask questions that other people have the same question. So it helps. So just queue up, and as the line dwindles down, please feel free to jump up and use that.
Alright, so I thought of many questions about the past, but throughout watching all of the films and listening to all the radio shows, pretty much all of them answered. So the only thing I can think of right now is, what is up with the new reality show that I heard about? If you could talk to us briefly about that.
Well, that's more of a personal project to me. It's not necessarily movement related directly. But not obviously everything that I do ultimately comes down to this context one way or another, even if it doesn't hold the Zeitgeist name. But Culture in Decline, it's called, is going to be a different angle, to try to appeal to a more cynical audience, which is much more common out there than those that are active and want to do something for change. Trying to get under people's skin that kind of enjoy the catharsis of laughing at the world for what it is, but maybe plant the seed of them feeling a certain degree of empathy and sympathy to the effect where they want to actually transcend this completely horrific horror show known as The World Today. Again, that gesture that I'm going for. So anyway, that's going to be out as that's like a side project for me. I've always wanted to do something that was different. This would be like a live show where I walk around like Santa Monica Pier and talk to people about, oh, do you know where money comes from? And just, you get to plant these seeds and just to see people's reaction to the Zeitgeist. I'm kind of interviewing the Zeitgeist, if you will. And from there, there'll be also kind of artistic vignettes. I have all sorts of little side concepts. For example, moving forward, remember those little vignettes like the classroom and the little joke scenes. Lots of little stuff like that I'm trying to have plenty of ideas for things that are comedic, but yet serve a social role and commentary. So full of stuff like that too. So it should be very interesting. If it all goes well, it might be picked up by some network, like the Julian Assange show just got picked up by RT. I'm thinking maybe some network come along and have the courage to put this on. And that would be wonderful to hit some kind of mainstream audience rather than just the internet. So it's an experiment.
Cool. Right on.
Fair, thanks.
Hi, my name's Aaron, and I was talking about some of the concepts with my. Okay. I was talking about some of the concepts with my stepdad about the resource-based economy, and he's a retired CEO, and he said something that I didn't really know how to respond to, so I'm asking how you would respond to this so I can be more equipped next time. So basically I was talking about automation and efficiency, having efficiency on the production side where there's fewer people needed to produce goods. He's a retired CEO of a company that manufactured air compressors. So having efficiency in production where there's fewer people needed, and also efficiency in consumption where there's less goods needed to serve their utilitarian purposes. So basically he said that he had implemented a lot of automation in his company, but he didn't have to lay anyone off. So basically they increased production without laying anyone off because of automation. So his argument is, well, we can just keep automating and we'll increase production, and it doesn't have to lead to people there being a lesser demand for human labor. So I didn't quite know how to respond to that.
Well, I would respond to him by asking him how pretty much the motivation, publicly the motivation of every other corporation that's ever gone through with automation invariably always lays people off. So statistically speaking, if you go back to the history of automation through the Industrial Revolution and everything else, very rare circumstances, and usually they're only temporary, when automation isn't laying people off, because invariably they only do it for profit purposes. So unless they have immediate new sectors within their corporation that people can go to, I'm confused by your father's response. I mean, historically speaking, the only reason that corporations really automate is to reduce their cost efficiency,
well,
increase cost efficiency.
They did have new they had new positions that were created because of, I guess they rolled out new.
Well, the ultimate economic, well, that's a very unique circumstance, and I guarantee you it won't last in the long run if they did achieve that, especially with the new design revolution happening through basically artificial intelligence. You have plenty of examples of computers now that are able to design things very intelligently with very minor adjustments made by humans. In the future, no one will sit in a boardroom with technicians and design a car. The car will be designed automatically through basically the algorithmic creation that relates to what the purpose of that machine is supposed to do. Then all the components will be fed into a very intelligent machine and it will output it, and then maybe the humans will decide what color it is. That's about the majority of the roles that we can foreshadow. And that's not a radical thing to state. You can go and research tons of things in the Kurzweil, Singularity Institute. There's already programs that do a great deal of design. If you go into a mechanics shop, they're using machine reference for all their decision making now. So I could go on a long tangent about it, but coming back to your father's point, that's very foreign to me. Does anyone want to add something to that? I will state one final thing though, is that the argument that automation creates more jobs, is that what your father's saying?
Stepfather, yeah.
Stepfather, I'm sorry. Big difference, right? The argument that technology creates more jobs is partially true, but the exponential increase that's happening right now, which is blowing, every week there's something new happening that's just much more, far beyond what we'd ever considered a year prior. That rate of increase is so staggering that whatever used to happen in the past, as far as human adaptation through re-education, basically, going from being a factory worker to learning to program a computer, we can't keep up anymore. The human brain, we can't learn fast enough to keep up with this. And that's why the argument of most classical economists is faulty now. It was historically accurate in the past. It's no longer accurate, but...
Yeah, something else I might add. If somebody had said that to me, whereas, okay, we didn't eliminate any jobs, but we brought on new technology that increased our productivity. Is that basically what he said, more or less?
Right, we brought on new automation that increased productivity.
But we didn't lay anyone off.
We didn't lay anyone off. So
right. Okay, well, this goes back to our supply-demand curve type of stuff, and that works only in it as so much as if you apply technology to something, and let's say before we had one person producing one good, we now have one person producing 100 of those goods because of the application to technology to make these compressors faster, cheaper, whatever. Well, you don't have to lay that one person off, who was before only making one good, as long as you found 99 more customers, right. So it works. So your stepfather could make that argument and say, I don't know, look, we made more money, it's all working, what's the problem? The problem is when you take the supply-demand curve arguments, as your father-in-law was doing, and you take them to the extremes, and you say, well, stepfather, what happens when, let's say, wow, now you've got one guy that can make 10, why not hire 10 more and make 1,000, right? We're going to make, ooh, godforsaken amount of money, But what do you do when you run out of customers? Huh? Yeah, what are you going to do?
Or you take the jobs away from the other areas.
Yeah. That's what you can kind of do. I mean, if you want to, if he even wants to go that far,
Presupposes purchasing power.
Exactly, right. So, I mean, I think the case in point, you can say, yeah, that does work, but, carried out to the extremes, and where do we go from there? Right. So, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. I feel equipped now to...
Greetings, Peter, and thank you for coming to Los Angeles.
Well, I live here, so... You should thank me for being stuck in traffic, speaking of inefficiency.
Thank you for being stuck in traffic. I was also stuck in that. I'm corresponding for the Greater China chapters, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China.
Okay.
How is the progress on the fourth movie?
Well, the fourth movie, which again is more of a personal project to me, I think it's important to remember that the film series isn't necessarily some kind of document that's representative of the movement. It tends to be an influence to bring people into the movement, especially given the first film, second film came before the movement even existed. The fourth film probably will not actually have the title of Zeitgeist, but considering doing a very different approach to very similar information, but not using the term Zeitgeist as its title, mainly for reaching a larger audience that might have been turned off by the Zeitgeist phenomenon in the past. So there's a different strategy there.
Okay. How is progress on the chapter guidebooks?
The orientation guide and the chapters guide, both those projects are in development and should be in PDF and video form very soon. The chapter guide, which is about 60, 70 pages, I think, that's going to be very, very informative. I just recently went through that again. It's going to be very helpful, and hopefully will be translated, obviously, in every language possible. So that should occur very soon as well. And we also have a quick start guide too, if you weren't aware.
That is available now.
Yes, the quick start guide is on our site, which runs down very briefly everything basically that we do.
Did the big question become an official TED Talk?
Well, it's a TEDx talk, which never really becomes an official TED Talk, but it did get enough views. I think it required like 15,000 views for them to recognize it on their official talk, which we got very rapidly. Excuse me, on their official site, TEDx site, not the TED. Luckily, hopefully, this will be a predecessor to getting me or somebody else onto the real TED stage, which would give it much more notoriety for sure.
Are you cooperating with other groups like OWS, Open Source Ecology, Free World Charter?
In a certain sense, cooperation with any group is basically simply contingent, or not even contingent, let me phrase this differently. Cooperation with another group has to do with them understanding and mirroring to at least 75% of what the Zeitgeist movement talks about. Unfortunately, Occupy Wall Street doesn't seek the type of larger order, at least not in their materials. They don't seem to seek the larger order removal of the monetary system and the market system stuff that we talk about. You'll find a few fringe people that talk about it. We planted lots of seeds in Occupy. I've given 2 talks with Occupy. I know lots of people associated in the, whatever you want to call it, in their leadership mode. I know they would never use that language, but you know what I mean, those that are organizers. But as far as collaboration, I look at the Zeitgeist movement as an open kind of palette that doesn't need to make direct, associative, collaborative notions. Anything can happen underneath the surface, though, through chapters. I encourage any chapter to go out and talk to their local community. We've given Zeitgeist events at Occupy Venice, for example. They were very nice to us. So it's less of a direct association when someone says, oh, the Zeitgeist movement works with this, the Zeitgeist movement works with that. We'll work with anybody under whatever pretense, as long as they really understand what we're moving forward with, or at least have a complete and utter sincere interest in doing whatever it takes to reach human sustainability on this planet. And you'd be surprised how limited most people's sense of thought is when it comes to change, unfortunately.
And have you started to imagine like the transition to go into a non-monetary society, like a middle step?
I have a second section of a lecture called Origins and Adaptations. I gave the first part in Vancouver Zeitgeist Day. The second part, the adaptations part, I've been working on for quite a while, and that's going to discuss a hybrid system, which to me really is the transitional system, and what the logic is that puts one foot in the current system and another foot in an advanced system based on all the things that we talked about in the movement. And that's a big mental exercise and something that will be coupled in part with something called the Global Redesign Institute, which is another project that is a virtual website that will hopefully expand into real development beyond just digital. In other words, you can make blueprint plans, we can have conferences in real time, we can talk to world leaders if they're willing to listen. And essentially, Global Redesign Institute is an attempt to transition through educating the public about what is technically possible. So the public says, oh, we have 1 billion people starving, and we say, well, it's not necessary if you simply do this. And then they realize that there is a possibility for change, and then slowly the logic begins to permeate, and they see what it means to create that environment, and what it takes to create that environment where 1 billion people aren't starving, or where we can live in a technically advanced society that can utilize all the fruits of technology, as has been alluded here. But the problem is, when you talk to people about those things, they understand it, but they are not willing, because of their values usually, to accept the change required, because they have to give up so much of what they're used to. So that's a huge subject between technological, relaying of technological ideas that can solve the world's problems, and challenging their values, which is another project in and of itself, which is why we have Zeitgeist Day, we have the Media Festival. We're always working towards the transition, is my point. So.
And you have said that you don't plan to have children until you have succeeded. Just wondering, have you changed your mind about having children?
Who's asking? Well, no. I hate to sound. By the way, I don't put anyone down who has children. I have plenty of friends with children that bring me to a great realization and motivation. To me, as cynical as it may sound, I wouldn't want to subject, based on what's happening now, I wouldn't want to subject a child to what's in store for the next generation. But doesn't mean my mind might not change. It's the activism of everyone around me and how much energy moves forward with all the organizations seeking change in the world might change my mind. I'm anti-children now, apparently.
I think they got the idea. Okay, and just want to let you know that the audience is growing very fast in Greater China.
Is it? Wow.
Many young people are getting finding out about this.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How's your communication there? Are you able to share quite a bit online, or is?
Yeah, well, actually, I just found out about Zeitgeist like 1 year ago, and then I went on like Facebook, social networks, and then I found that they had a Facebook page, and then they have a website. So then I just sent them an email, reach out to them, and then they asked me if I can do some like corresponding for them, and I said I'll gladly do that, and I can also help with translation and stuff.
Well, I'd like to talk to you maybe after, because I'm not sure if they have technological limitations with the internet and engaging in our international meetings that we do, like we just had one earlier this evening from people across the world. I'd be curious to know what they're capable of doing there as far as communicating with us directly. So
sure, I'll be very excited to talk to you about that.
Sure, that sounds wonderful. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just got a question about what role do you believe ID cards should play in a resource-based economy?
ID cards? Well, that's an abstract question. What is the point of an ID card? In this system, an ID card can be used for lots of things that basically inhibit your freedom. We live in a world based on marketing and control. And it's very easy for people to use identification systems for the sake of tracking people, what they're doing, how much of a threat they may be, beyond simple marketing stuff, which is abhorrent enough and an invasion of privacy in and of itself. But you have to ask yourself, identification in and of itself, what does that actually represent? So in the future, if you're not living in a world that's basically a bunch of people afraid of each other, especially the state power, constantly afraid of everyone else that might want to usurp that power because the system's based on competition, ID cards wouldn't be a problem at all, if even relevant. Obviously, you have to have some type of certification to engage in certain activities. You need an ID of some kind, or some type of something like a license to drive that's viable enough that people go through educational processes. So, if you're relating that to my first film, which sounds like you are.
I'm pretty new to the movement, but
okay. Yeah, I mean, ID cards or whatever the point really is. It just represents something, so it's hardly a big issue.
Might not even be a card.
Yeah, it might not even be a card.
One of the things that a resource-based economy sort of does presuppose that there has been a shift in the value system, or the set of values that it has even come about. So in the evolution of getting there, the actual value set of what would be valued as human values being the highest, and basically, I don't know how familiar you are with the movement, since you said you're sort of brand new, pretty brand new.
right.
So basically, the resource-based economy and access model removes the reward for exploitation. And the reason why you might fear somebody tracking you as an individual in this kind of society is because that information can be used to exploit you. So our system that we're promoting here, the resource-based economic model, would be something where everyone has access to resources that are available, and no person would have an advantage over another for that access as far as a status or anything. So if everyone has access to the same goods, then why would you need to do something corrupt in order to, in other words, the criminal aspect of the notion of information and tapping into that would not really be something of concern. So that may be why Peter sort of, it's a new question for us, because it might be more of an advantage to track information in general just from a social standpoint, so we always know how many resources there are in general, but the basic entire system is to create access for everyone equally and not even have social class stratification or having one person hoard something. That would not even exist in the kind of society we're talking about. Does that help you out?
Yeah, a little bit. I can see maybe after the revolutionary change comes that might apply, but I mean, what about today? Right now I own a...
What's the concern with it? Is it tracking your personal
No, not
identity?
at all. I'm all for ID cards. I have a 4-bedroom house that I'm living by myself, and I would be more than willing to allow a homeless person that you mentioned earlier to come in, stay for a period of time or anyone a year visiting San Diego. But I mean, if you just simply show an ID, I mean, hotels do it all the time. They don't just hand over keys when you give them a couple $100s, and they have a system to check to make sure they have at least a means to have a deposit. So I mean, if I had somewhat of ability to know who I'm dealing with, I mean, if I wanted to borrow your car right now, you would probably do it if I said, hey, my grandmother's dying and you had to go visit her at the hospital. But if you had a prior relation with me and you knew who I was, knew I had a steady job, or whatever, you'd be able to track me down if needed.
Well, I would encourage you to look into all the materials we put out. But I think if you go through our orientations and our lectures, you'll feel very different about that question based on what we're offering, because this isn't a peer-to-peer type thing. The system that we advocate isn't reliant on some type of trust mechanism between people, legally regulated, collateral type issues that you just described. That isn't the system that we're describing. So the best thing you do is watch Zeitgeist moving forward. You can just go watch it online for free. I think you'll feel very different about your concern. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Peter, and everyone sitting out there. My name is Tanae, and my initial question was actually going to be about the monetary system, but it appears that you kind of somewhat answered that. So my next question is good. I'm very new to this movement. I literally watched one of the videos 2 weeks ago, and I just had them a couple of days ago to ask my friend Brian up there about the Venus project, because I got really excited about that project. He was like, oh, by the way, Peter's going to be in town in 2 days. And I was like, no way. He was like, yeah. So I'm very excited to be here. But how soon do you see components of this project coming into fruition?
That's always the big question. That's the most common question. And I ask myself that question perpetually. So I identify with that necessity to know very much. And that's why, as mentioned prior, the Global Redesign Institute, if you're not familiar with this idea, there's a preliminary website, and I've given a few abstract relays about what it's going to represent. The idea of a hybrid economy is really where we're at. We have a green revolution in the world, right? We have all these people, it's becoming fashionable to be green. Granted, you have to be fairly well-to-do to buy a Prius. Basically the green revolution is for the rich, so you can afford to save the world. So it's a very small fraction of the population at this point, so we're not going to get very far. But that's there, though, that interest to do that, so the seed has been planted. And I think when people jump on the green revolution, they want to see truly sustainable practices happen, at least in industry, invariably they're going to gravitate towards what we're talking about, because we are representing the ultimate green revolution, except it goes way beyond that, if you will, because in order to have a truly green revolution, to use that language, you have to have a complete value revolution simultaneously, because all the materialistic elements and everything that's been ingrained in the culture, the property neuroses that we have, the fear that we generate of each other, huge list of cultural things that are more problematic, really, than obviously, actually, than the technological capacity we have to create true social sustainability and feed and clothe and everything else. So that's the real question. It's a value war out there, as I think was mentioned in the video that they showed. And our ultimate point with the Zeitgeist movement in the end is not to investigate new technologies, but to point them out and then ask people if they're willing to change their lifestyle to enable this type of revolution to occur. But that's a little bit of an aside. Invariably, back to my general point, the Green Revolution will facilitate certain elements of what we describe. In fact, I've been shocked at what's happened over the course of the past 2 years with the rhetoric in the world, because there's so many things that we talked about from the wilderness 2 years ago that you see like on the front pages now that I'm amazed. I'm like, wow, this is really starting to take hold at least a little bit. But until we are able to get the seed planted that the monetary system stands in the way of all of these wonderful changes, we're not going to get very far. So that's the ultimate barrier. In other words, I have no idea. But we're on a path. The path is there, I think you'll all admit. The question is, how far will it go? And how fast? And how much time do we really have before something really cataclysmic happens that stifles it that much more? And that's, I think, the biggest concern, frankly.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
So you had asked, like, your original question, when do we see, when could we see this as far as a time frame, right?
Yes.
Okay. Another question to ask that might facilitate an answer for you is, what does it take to create the kind of change? Not how long, but what is it going to take for a value shift? What is it going to take for people to realize the interdependence of the world system? What is it going to take for people to say enough is enough with stratification and the social stress that it creates? So start asking those kinds of questions rather than time frame questions, because there are too many variables to answer your question. He has no idea. There's too many different things could happen. But we also know what will happen as the system runs its course, and then there's ecological degradation, and we hit the wall on our energy production, as far as the traditional energy production, like fossil fuels and things like that. So once you start exploring what does it take, then a whole new range of possibilities, a whole new range of action, and a whole new range of thought processes will open up as far as being inquisitive. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so what?
Okay, my next question is, I know we were talking about fear, and what role do you think like our current institutions, as far as like religion and government, play in impeding this movement or stopping this movement altogether?
Impeding, well, okay. Let's just say, if you are speaking with somebody that has a fixed worldview, everything is presupposed certainty, versus what we're trying to express is that worldview is emergent. Emergent meaning that it changes over time. As new information comes to you, as new discoveries are made, new questions are asked, new answers are found. You put that up against a belief system that's what we could say is traditional, it's fixed, then there's a clash. And that's against part of the value war. So there's no, it becomes an art form in communication to speak to different groups of people, different belief systems, different dogmas, different traditional thinking modes, I guess. For an example, you don't run into a religious community and yell at them for being wrong for believing in something. Okay, they'll ostracize you right there. Where I'm from, I don't have those conversations. What I do instead is I approach them about monetary economics, because they're all very shrewd business people. And I talk to them about the problems of debt. And I talk to them about the problems of stratification and how it's not, how resources are overconsumed and the amount of waste and the problems that that creates in our health system and in our social interactions. And they relate very well to that conversation. So now I'm planting a seed to this thinking without having to come up against their fixed worldview on something, their identity, basically. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I see. Sure. You were talking about religion and what are the other groups you mentioned?
The
Government. Okay, well, I recognize that a lot of times when you look past the language, for example, Martin Luther King spoke a lot about God and Jesus and love, and when you look past that, you really see it, we're all kind of talking about the same thing as far as what's positive to people's lives and what's, sustainable. But as far as the whole value of people, deserving more because they contributed more, that's BS, and that has definitely got to go. And because it just, something John Fresco I think said was it's just an honor to do it. Just contributing to society is the whole return. So that's got to go.
Well, I would just say that in general, I think outside of the even institutions, we need to just really uphold free information flow, especially the internet. So because any kind of community or institution that starts to isolate people from information that would be progressive for humankind is going to hinder what we're working towards. So I am all for people just being encouraged, even in where they are as an individual, to go and find out for themselves. So I just would say wherever you are, wherever you can, to really encourage people to research things on their own, to look beyond just things that they've been told or taught. And once you're in that mindset and you really become an active learner as an individual, then a lot of things open up to you. So for me, the main hindrance is the education piece, which is why we're sort of the immune system in that respect, is that's all that we're doing is education, because the rest of it will come with that piece of it.
And I will add that as we describe ourselves as an immune system, if you will, there's also a very parasitic response mechanism built into this system, which comes from tradition. And I think that's the word that underlies both the governmental structure and the religious structure. And there's nothing more terrifying to most people than having their identity threatened. So, I'm often attacked for being an atheist, evil communist atheist, or maybe all of us are. And it's really weird how people can frame things like that in their defense mechanism, and are shocked to realize, for example, that my biggest social influence was Martin Luther King, who was very, very religious. But you take his language, as Brandon pointed out, and you look through the religious references, and you just have this exact poetry of what so many other activists, religious or not, have been talking about for human equality and human unity and social sustainability for thousands of years, in fact. But it's within the value system that they've come to understand. It's almost like it runs through everything. It's very fascinating when I think about it. There's an underlying civil rights thing happening here that, yes, governments and religious institutions or any traditional establishment will fight because that's what they've been taught to do, to preserve their identities. On a more pragmatic point, one of the most important elements of the way the movement's structured is as holographic chapters, which means that no individual chapter or individual person serves as a leadership role or as a focal point. It's a global movement, and the beauty of that is if there is a point where a government gets frustrated with a very large chapter that's doing activism, just like Occupy Wall Street was very violently shut down because the way they placed themselves is very vulnerable, which was a necessity for their activism, by the way, but that's the way they function. With the movement in the holographic structure, it makes it less prone to that type of symbolic attack. Where, okay, so they ripped out New York's Occupy. Suddenly everyone's like, at least a lot of people were like, oh, Occupy's over. New York's gone. They lost the train of thought. It was the symbology. And that's something that we're trying to lose very rapidly, is the symbology of the institution. And when you have a global movement working in tandem, but yet holographic and independent, it's a very powerful place to be. That's what makes Anonymous so important, even though they go too far, because they have no central philosophy that's communicated, because it's just a big black area, you know what I mean? They have their little statement, but you can't really learn much about Anonymous, really, except what their claimed actions are. In fact, you have no idea who's even doing things if they're actually a part of the group at all. So when I see headlines, Anonymous does this, I'm like, how do they know? Maybe one random hacker kid that's 14 years old that cracked the FBI website for 5 seconds. So they go too far, but that logic is great. So I really appreciate that, and that's our defense to that, and that's why the movement has to lose faces very, very rapidly, but yet you replace it by tons of faces. And that's what I'm hoping, that's what we're all hoping, I think, to attain over time. Because I know I've been more vulnerable than most, just because of starting things, and I'm trying my best to diminish. That's why I didn't speak today in part, even though I've been very busy. I'm trying to get other people, to step forward, and that's what I encourage everyone to do. If all of us can't step up and understand this stuff, then we're not going to get anywhere. We might as well end right now, because if you want true freedom in the world, it's going to come from an independent understanding of how the world actually works, and the courage to represent that. And if people aren't willing to do that, they just want to follow the leader, then it's just not going to happen. That's how we've become a slave society to begin with, from early feudalistic peasants who had no education. They were easy to control. So, it's a good one.
I would just say in some of what's been holding it back and why it hasn't changed so quickly and everything else like that, you have to think, okay, the three qualities of the Zeitgeist movement at this point in time and age is that we're a minority, we're a very young, new idea, and we're very small, or the time that we've been around. Compared to, how did we get this way? It's been going on for generations, eons. It's the major train of thought. And there's an incredible, organization or establishment that's been going on that's keeping it status quo. So, but everything starts somewhere. Right. And it starts small, really small, like this room and these people and these ideas. And then, just as Philip was saying earlier, through the ripple effect, with more people telling more people, it grows and grows and grows. And maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, we'll look back and go, oh yeah, why didn't we see that so obviously? Oh my God. See, even though we're small and we're young and we have a new train of thought, whenever you have something new, it's a bit of an affront. What we have on our side is to be so, whatever, we're right. It's just common sense with uncommon results. Sooner or later, sense and sensibility is going to capitulate for rationality and insanity. So it's just a matter of, I don't know how much time before people go, those guys make sense. And those politicians and organizations, they're not making sense. We're going to go this way. So.
You specifically mentioned governments and religions, and those are both metaphysical things. They don't actually exist. We can't point to government in a physical form. There are politicians and people who hold up these establishments. So what about the people who would be against this kind of movement? Well, even people at the very top of the pyramid, I find that they would actually benefit from this as well, because they're stressing and they have to constantly work to maintain their addiction to hierarchy and domination. So ultimately it would actually even benefit them as well.
Well, I just want to thank you all, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I thank you for shaping my dreams and giving me a vision of what the future will look like. And I'm very in tune with the universe, and I believe that time is everything. And I don't believe that I'm here in this space with you all. This didn't just happen. So thank you very much.
Hello everybody. My name is Daniel. I have a couple questions. So, theoretically in the future, if the Zeitgeist movement catches tons of wind, grows exponentially, and then it actually threatens the infrastructure of the culture. And then what do we do if, the government and then the media launches this whole blitz attack on it all, and people in the movement get arrested for terrorism, whatever?
Well, such a question is such a hypothetical, makes certain assumptions. How do you know those things aren't happening already? At the end of the day, the government institutions and the intelligence agencies, which are there for the preservation of the institutions, they've been playing this game not just centuries, but for millennia. And that's the preservation of the establishment and the shutting down of anything that threatens it. And the greatest thing that has happened that I've learned from, say, the American Civil Rights Movement is the non-participation ethic and ignoring basically the attacks. The biggest fear that they have is people not participating in the system, not doing things illegal. I mean, someone can call us names, but they have to have something to base it on, don't they? As long as you're not doing anything illegal and you're willfully not participating in the foundational support of this system, which is probably the extent of our protest actions, if you will, for the future, if there is such a thing, if it comes to that, there's very little the attacks will hold up. They'll fade away very, very rapidly. And I think people in this culture have become so used to the attacks. The media is so robust. WikiLeaks, the public at large is beginning to see the underlying corruption of the preservers, I'll call them, those that don't want any change, as opposed to, say, 100 years ago where there was so much trust and so much faith, and all your news came from one newspaper that was thrown at your door. It's a very different world today. So I think the patience of the public has been pushed, and they're beginning to go to alternative means and think about alternative things. Assassinations, there's all sorts of lists you could go. Remember that period in the 1960s where they just killed everybody? from King to Kennedy, to Kennedy's brother, to Lenin. You just go straight down the line. There's just this huge death toll in like a 5-year span. And all of them had very spooky circumstances. They wouldn't dare do that again because of the martyrs that they would create. And I say they, not like I'm pointing to some... What's that?
And also they kill all the producers.
That's right. And I'm not saying that there's some they in a conspiratorial sense. When you put people in a position of preservation, you'd be amazed at how sick they'll behave, far beyond, say, some black operation or something like that that I've alluded to in, say, my first film. It's more complicated than that. I want to make that clarification because I don't agree with this conspiratorial worldview at all that's perpetuated by a lot of different people out there. You put somebody with a lot to lose in a certain position, like a big corporation, you'd be astounded at how they'll behave, how corrupt and violent they might turn their behavior. It's a natural consequence of this system. The real propaganda against us and a lot of other groups like Occupy Wall Street didn't come from the government. They came from private corporations and PR firms. So keep that in mind. So hopefully that answers your question. We just keep moving forward. You don't do anything illegal. We promote nothing but a peaceful, positive view of the world. People will do their best to spin and twist, but they're not going to get very far. I mean, everything that's happened in the course of human history has been a move towards more and more balance, whether it was sexual balance, or gender balance, whether it was race balance. Now we're hit the class balance. We're at the point where we don't have to, it's a civil rights issue now with having all the inequality in the world. It's not fair. Literally, just like hanging someone from a tree is not fair to them. The structural violence that we have in this system far exceeds all of the dictators and all the wars we have. People are dying from poverty in vast ways across the world, unlike any other period in history. That's a civil rights issue because it doesn't have to exist. All of that trend, if you follow it, means that we're on the right path. So.
All right, and then I have another question too. Speaking as realistically as we can, in which people, or around politics, even media, maybe even like military, which people around the world would be most efficient, or most effective if we got them over the cause, I guess?
Obviously, the police and the military are the status quo preservers, and I had a film I wanted to make that's been on the back burner, which was targeted directly towards security forces of the world. I haven't had a chance to do that one yet. You want to get people to understand what it means to protect society. Unfortunately, that value is quite twisted. I could go on a long tangent on military and police, and they have no idea what they're doing because they're so brainwashed into the structure that they support. But if you can get them on your side, wow, imagine. I mean, that's been the benchmark of every other major revolution, if you will. Not to say that this is not like a physical revolution, but once the military starts to realize what's happening in a given country, if you want to think about it in that context, they've always been the ones to turn things around. I don't agree with that. I don't think the military should exist at all, but at this point in time, yes. Other than that, the scientific community needs to grow up and get social. I'm nothing but frustrated by the scientists out there that refuse to actually. They are at the cusp of what defines progress and their understanding, and I'm more frustrated, frankly, with the scientific community than I am, say, the religious or political community. Because they don't have the balls to step up and really talk about the implication of what they're describing as it should be applied to the social system. They're terrified of losing their tenure or whatever. And I can understand it, but I wish they would really start to take a socially conscious view. There's maybe 2% of the scientific community actually applies the broader view to improving society. Instead, they just stay in their little world. It's sad.
All right, thanks. That's all I had to ask.
Thanks a lot.
I have a question. How do you feel about the stigma created by the first Zeitgeist film and what it might do to stifle the bigger picture of the rest of the movement?
I love the stigma from the first Zeitgeist. People ask me that question a lot, and frankly, if it wasn't for the first film, none of this would have happened. Not to say that that type of logic of causality really necessarily defends itself, and you could say it's the same thing about some other type of causality that started from a really horrific point, though I won't go on that tangent. You know, the first film makes, to me, the film series has a natural transition of focus. It brings my maturity out as an artist and a filmmaker, and I think people identify with it on that level. So they see the first film, they see the direct attacks and the extreme artistic aesthetic, I mean the emotional drive that's built into it, over the top, almost propaganda-like, because it really was an art piece. You know, you can mix those terms up. It was an aesthetic. I was there to piss people off and get under people's skin. But then I began to grow up as the film series progresses. And I think that train of thought really serves a role, which is why I would never make any more changes to the first film, even though I have done updates to it to keep it temporally, well, non-temporal, if you will. So no, I don't think it's a problem at all. People love to use it. You know, they love to use it as an attack piece, but that doesn't really represent anything. If they want to focus on that as something and ignore 99% of everything the movement talks about, well, that's their neuroses. That's their problem, not mine.
I've just seen it turn off a lot of people I've talked about it because they see that first film and they think, oh, well, I guess that's what the rest of this is about. It just stops.
Which is why I don't associate the film series directly to the movement, and I've been vocal about that ever since the beginning. We have our own. What's that?
I think that's a good idea.
Well, I've never attempted to pitch. You won't find the film series anywhere linked on our main global site, and I've tried desperately to get the film series off of all the chapter sites. But some people just take it as a good tool, and it is a good tool, especially the last two. And it's a good tool with the first one too, though. I see it all the time who you speak with. I speak with people that understood the first film and its appropriate context based on what I was going for, and they followed the whole train of thought, never had a convoluted thought to begin with. They got it. Then you have other people that really misinterpret, and I met people that you couldn't believe some of the people I met from the first film that scared the hell out of me. But they're coming from their own projection of thought and paranoia, guys that listen to bad radio shows of people that are obsessed with things that are irrelevant, and there's all that noise that I won't get into. So I think it served a decent role, and I don't push the film series, which is why I'm probably not going to make a fourth one. I want to start a new set, a new idea, a new name, and let it go from there, even though it's the same train of thought and still my communication.
With the chapters, we actually encourage people to decide what's best for your audience. So if you're kind of feeling out the person that you want to communicate this information to, and you know that they're not going to be open to the first Zeitgeist movie, then show them one of the others, or show them another film, show them some of Jacques Fresco's work. There are so many, we're producing so much media as a movement now. It's almost hard to link to it all. It's there. There are lots of different variations, things from 10 minutes to 3 hours to series to radio shows and things you can read and videos. So there's going to be something for everyone, but at the same time, that also means that then you have to be careful not to look at something and say, well, that shouldn't be a part of the mix, because that's reaching a different demographic than what you're looking to reach. So be careful with saying, oh, that's useless, we need to only focus on. Well, maybe that's because you have a particular audience in mind. Zeitgeist, the first film, has brought plenty of people. In fact, if you track the views of that film on Vimeo, it still, I think, gets more hits than any of the other films altogether. And I just think there's a draw there, I think, because of the controversy. People are just curious. And how many people were curious just because of the controversy and everybody else had seen it, that now they have to see it? And then they start to think. And maybe then they hear later, oh yeah, that's just a conspiracy group, and somebody says, no, actually they're trying to change the world. Did you see this one? I mean, sometimes it starts conversation. So I wouldn't, throw that one out, but I would just say if you have a different audience, then there's plenty of other material.
Right. That's kind of what I was going to say. As far as the stigma created from the first film with the movement, it creates this interesting relationship with people that because I do a lot of activism on, we were at Venice the other week, tabling activism, and people are walking by and you say, hey, have you heard about the Zeitgeist movement? And they kind of give you this look like they've heard of it and they know what it's all about. And then you say, we've got some documentaries, the second film, have you seen the second and third films? And they're like, there's this second and third
film.
film.
Exactly.
So they have like this idea that it's only one movie kind of a thing, and then it creates this interesting relationship between people in the movement because they had this first impression of it as this whatever they think of it, and then they discover, like Jen said, that we're trying to change things, we're trying to change the world. So it's an interesting relationship that develops.
One of the things we've recently run across is we have distinctions in some of the materials that we provide. One is information about the movement, but we also are interested in people who've never heard anything about the movement. So the one thing that I came up with was that the Zeitgeist movement supports the Zeitgeist movement series movies in its information and education of the public. So it's kind of turning it around and saying we're not here because of the movies. The movement itself supports the movies because of the information and education it brings to the public. So we're going to kind of own it that way because the movies are still a very good way for people to get introduced. So does that, yeah, okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the platform you're launching for the Global Redesign Institute. Now, I know there's already institutions that exist. What exactly are they tinkering with any free energy devices, or what are they up to?
Well, that's two questions, really. I mean, the Global Redesign Institute, let's see if I can explain this very succinctly. It's going to start as a digital platform similar to Wikipedia, but not text-based. It's based on the input of the public to come in with sourced material. We'll have moderators, if you will, monitoring all the information put in for clarity and maintaining the basic security of it for vandalism and all those basic things. But it's about a tangible virtual redesign, technically, of the world, starting region by region. So that sounds huge. Let's start with just Los Angeles, or let's start with just, say, Santa Monica. You take in this day and age, you have global maps that have everything tracked. Google, easy. You have layers you can add to these maps through programming, which can be very proprietary and custom, which can take into account the quality of the region and the population, all the variables that basically create, that define the social area that you're in. And you plant all that information and think about what the most technically efficient means would be based on what we know today. Technically, forget money, just what could be done. And you have these things, I don't know, like say put vertical farms off the coast of Santa Monica connected to desalinization. We reference the exact technology that exists today and say, oh, we can feed everybody for free with X number of people just overseeing the mechanization, vertical farming. If you look into it, the University of Columbia, very powerful technology they've been coming up with. And we begin to show the world, say, hey, you don't need 85,000 homeless people. You don't need 85,000 people starving. And then you begin to track the logic of how beneficial it would be. You have everyone do it across the world. So you have teams. Every chapter, for example, the Zeitgeist movement has a technical team, if you will. You don't have to be super technically knowledgeable. You don't have to be an industrial engineer to think about this. And there's a lot of freedom to the way that the programming works. You can make variations of it. And the higher manifestation of this is you have conferences. So we have a big conference at a local hotel. We have full blueprints. We have digital projections. We have 3D fly-throughs of what a new society, technically oriented, forget money, what we could do if we chose to. And I think that's a very powerful thing to communicate with the public. Now, the Venus Project, the Buckminster Fuller Foundation, they have little tidbits of things. You know, they think, well, you could have this. You know, here's the logic for this. That's great, but they don't apply it to a region. I've had to see one actual application by a lot of these futuristic institutions where they're literally working to represent a region. And if you really want to get people on your side, say, Los Angeles, show them how their world can be transformed for the better. I think that'd be good.
And it kind of sounds like it's kind of like an open source platform.
Precisely. That's the beauty of it. Is we're going to try and get the group mind, as I call it, to come forward with this. And when you get enough people thinking along a certain train of thought, like a machine, you can start to get solutions very, very rapidly. Someone might think, oh, let's have a up and over system for, say, intersections where pedestrians don't get hit and there's no stoplight. Someone might say, wait a minute, let's do roundabouts in this configuration. Suddenly the protocols, the applications start to narrow down based on what the most logical approach would be based on what we know today. It's always going to change, though. That's the beauty of the group mind. That's why Wikipedia is so successful in certain contexts, and why it's about 96% accurate. That type of group mind harnessing is what we're going for, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
What do you call it now?
The Global Redesign Institute. It's just a generic term. Try not to step on the toes of other institutes that have similar names that don't do the same thing, but trademark, all that stuff.
I was going to ask you a question that had to do with conceptions about that. So it's very nice to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you see that as it sounds like you see that as a grassroots sort of thing.
Well, if you want to give it that term, it's not the kind of thing where, I mean, the higher stages of it will take people that are working very diligently. This could associate with a nonprofit. There might be a lot of work to be done in the higher stages of such development to make it communicable. But at the early stages, yes, it's grassroots. You don't have to have a PhD. If you really, all of us can think creatively if we're given enough time and enough input. And the beauty of this is that it's going to be a huge manifold of people thinking about restructuring in society technically. I'm not talking about human values, but technically redesigning, and just that thought process. I'm so excited to see what will happen when people start to feed back with each other and correct each other about what we could do, because when it comes down to it, there's only one train of thought. And it's a sustainable train of thought based on what's possible. And that's the real revelation of human society at this point, that there's really only one train of thought now with respect to how we're supposed to conduct ourselves if we want to be optimized and reduce all the stresses and create social sustainability by its complete definition.
Okay, so I guess my question becomes about the idea of also addressing those issues. I mean, you mentioned the word conferencing, and I like the sound of that, because I think that what you're talking to is a wide array of complex questions that come at us right now as complex questions, many around which many people would say it's just impossible to face. There's a very appropriate place to address the issues that you're describing directly to those people, almost like a challenge. Here's the conference we need to have. These are the issues we need to address, and who we need to take it up with as much as...
You mean like a kind of a debate environment, or what do you...
Well, if necessary, if it's necessary. You're talking about a scientific basis for what you're founding, and you're saying there's a foundation in the scientific legitimacy of what you're talking about.
Yes.
So I think, my strongest impression when looking at these issues for myself over many years has been that the single issue in the way all the time is willingness. So where that gets barred the most is where the power resides the most fully.
Of course.
Unless you get out beyond, unless you can get to the point where, where one voice equals one vote and the number of votes adds up correctly. So we're so far from that now, and we're facing all those issues. Occupy is facing those issues for us. Occupy is building your state.
I'll state this, and I know we have to speed up because we're going to run out of time. What's happening in the world in general with Occupy and to Greenpeace, to Anonymous, to WikiLeaks, to all the other traditionally established ACLU, all the other civil rights / human rights, environmental rights organizations, animal rights, is there's a confluence occurring between all of them slowly that realizes that they're all sharing the same motivation. And that's the most epic realization that I'm slowly watching unfold, and that makes me very excited, which is why when I refer to the Zeitgeist movement, I think it's a passive entity to the effect that we're planting seeds. We have no idea where they're going to take root. We have no idea when, say, a big core group in Occupy might grab our rhetoric, maybe not even knowing it. They might think it comes to them magically. And they grab our rhetoric and they begin to see the logic of it. Boom, suddenly Occupy becomes zeitgeisty. These are the types of seeds that have been planted, are being planted, and I think have taken root in many ways that I think, frankly, are occurring right now, but it's not on the surface yet. So I would conclude with that. There's something happening in the world very, very rapidly that will hopefully overcome the power barriers that you're describing.
I also want to just comment that when I talk to other people about the movies, I tell them to watch the third one first.
Good plan.
I really congratulate you on the talk in Ojai I listened to that at the beginning. I saw 10 minutes. Wow, it's going to be great.
Yeah, that was hard.
And then when it really came to 10 minutes, I was very pleased.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you guys for arranging this meeting, and I'm very glad that I'm here. My question is, Joseph, can you please expand on the idea of a hybrid transition, a hybrid economy? Also, do you think that things have to get worse before they get better?
Well, there are certain things I could list that could be applied to this system that would basically come in the context of the green revolution that we've come to understand in the pop culture. I'll give one clear example. If you were to reverse the liability of goods production back to the manufacturer, similar to a lease or a rental, but you made it widespread, and you put the responsibility of the endurance of products, their sustainability, back on the corporation, and you made a mandate for this, you had the government step up and force this, just like they force environmental protocols, the EPA, this would be a powerful hybrid step. That's one idea. Just like back in the day, the early telephones that were made by Bell South were serviced by Bell South, therefore they were indestructible. I still have one. You could throw it down the Grand Canyon and it won't break. It's amazing. They knew what they were doing. They didn't want to bother having to service it. You put that liability back in the corporation, they'll stop their intrinsic and planned obsolescence. There'll be a lot of consequence.
Accountability is a big issue. I don't think they would take accountability for certain things like that.
Well, if
unless people.
And again, it would have to be. That's the. Yes, you'd have the consumer culture would have to force their hand in government legislation, and governments have to do various things to mandate to make that possible. It is possible, though. It is possible to see that type of idea come through, especially in a world that's becoming more and more obsessed with the fashion of being green, which is pretty much all we have, unfortunately. But nevertheless, that's one example, and that's about the best I can give without going on a long tangent. And you had a second part of the question.
The first part, I was just mainly trying to understand the hybrid economy. Does that mean we would have to pursue government to act and pursue corporations to act?
In that context, yes. It could come from a grassroots place. It doesn't mean the government's going to like it.
As consumers, as citizens, or as?
Well, as people that, again, with all the environmental and ecological rights groups that have emerged in the past 5 years, which has been enormous. If you want to see any activist groups there was a Paul Hawken lecture where he listed every single environmental group that has emerged over the course of the past number of years. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people like us, basically, that want to see something more sustainable occur. So those seeds are definitely there, and it's growing. Every 5 seconds, someone emails me some new movement or something that they keep asking me my opinion on. As far as the breakdown that you mentioned, does it have to get worse before it gets better? And I think that's a double-edged concept. We certainly hope not. That's why the Global Redesign Institute, moving rapidly enough, could plant the seed faster and show the positives so obviously that people would be so quickly to see the problems that we have today, as opposed to, say, waiting for oil to hit $7 a gallon, or waiting for some huge union to go on strike because they can no longer afford their wages. There's a very fragile environment out there. Generally speaking, I would agree that most people have a blinder on, and even those that are impoverished, they tend to accept their state of normality, and they'll fight to the tooth to preserve it. Misery loves company. There's something that's happened in culture where they don't see beyond their own lifestyle, and they accept it, and that's unfortunate, which in those contexts, yes, it has to get worse before it gets better, because usually they're too narrow, unfortunately, culturally bred, to see how much better things could be because it threatens their identities so much. And that's a very massive, that's the ultimate question. That is the ultimate question of values. And I really don't know the answer to that, but I think both those two components I just mentioned will come into play.
One more really quick one. This is a global movement, and this means that around the world people have to be part of it and participate with this movement in order for change to happen.
Yes and no. Yes and no. As I said with planting seeds, we don't know where things can materialize. Occupy was a very unique example because so much rhetoric in Occupy obviously came from similar sources to the stuff that we described, even though it was focused in a different way. So you never know. You never know what politician. When I was in Israel doing a conference, I met with the head CEO of Solare, which was just acquired by Siemens. And he had all these amazing ideas for transitional ideas, completely identified. This is a guy in his 60s, huge, meets with government officials, meets with all these monstrous people in the energy industry, and he identifies, who knows, what he could do as he plants the seed. So the movement, it's great, the poetry to see it as a huge global movement of billions of people, but I don't think it's going to work that way. I think it's going to be much more broken and isolated and much more complicated. But anybody else want to comment on that?
Real quick, I got something.
I do. Well, I would just wanted to say I caught the end of a public broadcast program where I think the CEO of Patagonia was kind of speculating about what the future would be, sort of along the lines of civil rights and the green movement, I think, being incorporated into business. And one idea that he had was that he thinks that there are going to be things that the consumer would scan to get a grade on a product that shows you a rating of the work environment that was made in and the materials that was used, how efficient they are, the carbon footprint, that kind of thing, that would become. And I think, I thought, wow, here's a CEO of an existing business who is wanting that, is hoping that consumers go there. So, that's just one example of something that could happen, but of course, and that's just to speak to the value set to hopefully bring us closer.
Just back to your question about the transition, one good idea I've had would be an economy that's post-scarcity in regards to needs, and still a market in regards to wants, and then we'd slowly transition into complete post-scarcity.
Which is socialism by definition, based on but he's absolutely right. That would be an amazing transition.
Yeah,
if it wasn't so abhorred.
Yeah, that's very true. And preferably it would be done in an anti-authoritarian fashion rather than even with the state at all, hopefully. And another good idea for the transition is, do you know about the Earthship model? It's an individual sustainable house that has its own greenhouse, its own water, its own sewage system, its own solar panels, and they're almost becoming cost efficient. There's a lot of things in the way of that, of course, including the building codes. But once that model becomes cost efficient, people are going to start demanding that kind of house as opposed to another kind of house, the same way they demand an iPhone as opposed to a phone like mine, which is something like this. So that's the goal.
Hello. Peter, you talked earlier about your progression as an artist throughout the films, and then with the current project you're working on and kind of, wanting to go in a different direction. I thought that was really interesting, or sorry, not a different direction, but in a different way.
Creation.
So my question is, because I thought that was interesting, looking back on kind of where you had started in your original, let's say, your mindset in creating that as an artist versus now, what things have you taken away or learned from that if you were to talk, to a younger artist or activist in this current setting, you might be able to give, I won't say, words of wisdom, but what you've learned through your own personal journey?
I guess it's having the confidence and understanding and respect where you are at that point in time, and not constantly second-guessing or trying to cater your communication to somebody else or some demographic. If you really want to be an artist, I don't mean a professional. Professional is an artist. If you want to really communicate and express yourself where you are, where you're an honest representation, there's going to be a great deal of fault and problems and fallacy and issue with that inherently, because you're always in a position of transition. You have to own that. And you have to keep that vulnerability as a part of the expression, which, oddly enough, people will identify with. Because everyone prefers to see vulnerability as opposed to perfection, I find, because it lets it resonate with them. The culture keeps magnifying the perfect, from models to just anything you think of. It's trying to exaggerate the perfection element that you see that doesn't actually exist. Whether it's, whether it's a book, I can think of a lot of different examples. But they're not really representing a communication that is organic, usually. It's very rare you find organic. That's what made me so impressed by the first film, is because it wasn't intended to be released. It was just my catharsis. And the fact that it took hold so strongly, so rapidly, shocked me and changed my way of thinking Because this was the first time after working in advertising for years, I did something that I just said, fuck it, I'm going to do something that's exactly what I feel like communicating right now. And if others identify with it, then great. If they don't, then that's okay too. And that's what I learned the most, is if you just trust yourself, it doesn't matter where you are. And I think most great artists that you'll meet throughout, Picasso, Dali, or even scientists and engineers, they tend to find that they look back and they sort of don't like what they did earlier, but they accept it. They accept where they are. They don't try to change the past. You know, it's a part of the evolution. Does that help?
Yeah, it does make sense.
So just be honest. You know,
right.
And even if you meet someone who's so backwards and messed up, and I tend to have more respect for like really fucked up people that, well, they're honest. They're completely honest, but they might be totally deranged and messed up and completely horrible values, but they're honest. And that's such a rare quality to find because people are always so concerned about what others think of them that they navigate their whole lives based on other people's perception. And it's just unfortunate.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David. I'd like to start off saying thank you for all the great job you're doing for the movement. I'm from Sweden and I currently study psychology here in LA. What is your opinion on how incredibly fast, huge number of people watch the Coney video on YouTube? And the showing of psychology that allowed people supposedly care about problems in the world and become aware of them. And so do you think the change in people's attitude might give them a greater urge to follow the ideas promoted by the Zeitgeist movement?
Well, I'm sure others may have a comment on this. I'll say really fast that what I found most amusing about the Coney 2012 phenomenon is that the whole thing was a retribution piece. It was about revenge. It was a revenge piece. If you really look at the psychology of what made that attractive, it was about revenge against some guy, some evil dude,
some villain,
who, if he was caught, wouldn't immediately be replaced by 10 other dudes who exactly think the same way as him. So that's what I found so amusing about that phenomenon and why it was held up in such arms, which just simply reminded me of how immature the vast majority, I hate to sound so arrogant, but how immature the vast majority of the people really are. And we still locked into this retribution state of mind. As opposed to describing in that video, the root causes of all the poverty in that region, why that military establishment existed to begin with, why they felt the need to be so exploited, and what the structural violence inherent because of the environment that's been created. And you extrapolate that to all the horrible things that have happened around that region, from the Western powers of domination of resources. The train of thought goes crazy when you really start to think about causality, and suddenly that dude, he's just another victim of culture. And I feel bad for him. But anyway, if anyone else wants to comment on that. But as far as the viral thing, I was impressed by that, but I think it holds into that value. I've looked into that, and I tried to track how we did that for our own purposes, to think about how best to navigate. But I don't want to kowtow to the worst abstractions of people's values like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't want to do that. The closest I'm going to come to that is my new series, Culture in Decline. But that's going to be a little bit better and more sophisticated.
Along those lines, I was thinking recently that, well, I'll pose this question. So think about like the main villain that you never want to be compared to as if you're anyone, any public figure, because if you say the name of this person, it's automatically like the most horrible, horrific, evil person. Can anybody think of what?
Hitler.
Hitler.
Voldemort.
Hitler. So Hitler. So I started thinking, like, how, and I hear like how many millions of people were massacred as a result of that regime, and then I think, how many millions of people are affected by poverty, and yet we don't look at the structure and say Hitler. Billions. And if Hitler is the most evil thing that you can think of, and people get enraged when you say, oh, Hitler, and I agree, I mean, it was horrific. However, why doesn't that compare to how we evaluate the system? Those same people who are, cursing Hitler's name look at us and say, oh, the system, we gotta have our money, this has always been around. And I think, it's Hitler. I mean, let's just think about it for right now. Now, it had its day. I mean, it's a tool that we can move past now. but we don't need poverty anymore. We can fix that problem if we come together around it. So that occurred to me the other day, and I just thought, why can't people think differently?
I'd say one good thing about the Coney 2012 is the fact that the good intentions are there. If only we could redirect them towards anything else. It would be really beautiful to see what the ripple effect of all those millions of views could have done if it went towards Fresco's new film, or even moving forward. I mean, it's a shame. I saw in 4 days, Coney 2012 had more views than Zeitgeist Moving Forward did throughout its career. And it's just a shame that that happened. And yeah, it really was just one big revenge piece. Yeah, we just need to co-opt those good intentions and put them towards something that's actually positive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ellie, and this is for Joseph. I'm glad she mentioned this bit about Hitler. Okay. And people are concerned about when is this transition going to take place. And I feel you, by abdicating or not being a leader, is slowing the transition. Because when you look at Gandhi, Martin Luther King, or even Hitler, the things that those people accomplished were the group following them. And I think if you took back a role as a leader for at least a while until it really gets going, because you've got a lot of stuff to say that just blew me away, and I could see all these other people completely change their way of thinking of the world. And I feel you should reconsider your role.
That's very kind. I will continue to talk and promote, but it puts, it's too easy for people out there, given the mentality that we have, say, with the President of the United States. Everyone wants to look up to somebody and assume that somebody else is going to take the reins. As I alluded to earlier, if you want a free society, you need an educated society. You need a society that, over the course, on average, the medium of thought is shared and sophisticated enough where no one needs to rely on other people to think for them and make their decisions for them. That's what a true democracy would be if there was such a thing. And that's the danger. And I really appreciate your comment. I'm not stopping what I do. But I have to, for my own safety, the safety of my family, because if I get more and more well-known, I've had, you can believe the obnoxious harassment I've had, both live and online, or they tried to blame Jared Loughner, his actions on my first film. Did you see that? that was amusing to say the least. Nevertheless, these are dangerous things out there. I don't have any money. It's like if something happens to me to where like someone tries to really gang up on me with a lot of money, I'm doomed. These are things that I think about. I'm in a very fragile state personally, and sadly enough, I do have to think about that for my own survival as I want to live and be normal and all those basic things. So I'm not a martyr. I'm not going to sacrifice myself. Either people wake up and they begin. It's not that hard to talk about these things, by the way. Granted, I think I've gone through this stuff more than a lot of people have, but I've done an enormous amount of communication, as I think you've noticed. And if people go back and listen to the 2 years of Q&A I did at Blog Talk Radio, you'll pretty much have every question ever answered. And then to articulate yourself, like you, my friend, you just be able to have confidence in speaking about these things, and you become the leader, as Gandhi pointed out. I think Gandhi, he knew what he had to do, and he suffered greatly for it. And also simultaneously, after he was taken out, just like King was taken out, you could see the immediate psychological ramification of those that followed, a complete loss of hope. And that's a dangerous place to be. We want to get beyond that.
I still feel that you're slowing the transition down by not taking a big leadership role.
He's still a very large influence.
I got that. But
what do you want me to do?
Be a leader.
I've given an enormous number of talks the past year, and odds are I probably won't stop. But I have a job as a leader, if you want to put it in this context, to present myself as not the leader to force others to step up.
Wrapping up, I just wanted to quickly add to that we're talking about a socially sustainable system as well, and for that it's not going to be by force. To have this carry on and have it not be by force, which is what we really don't want, because that would mean it's not sustainable if you have to force somebody to do it. It means that everybody has to really want it, which means everybody has to be educated for themselves. And we need to really, we're enabling people if they have to get, be spoon-fed information. They really need to become a self-directed learner, and we need to set the example. And I think it's wonderful that this movement encourages all sorts of people to stand up where they are and just talk about these ideas.
Right. Absolutely. This is the last question, okay? We got to wrap things up.
Pressure! So you mentioned, Peter, going through the Blog Talk Radio, all those recordings to kind of get the answers. So that raised the question in my mind of, where did you get, what was your source? If I wanted to go to the source, you're kind of like the source, but what's the source of the source?
Well, that's an enormous question. You entered down the rabbit hole of influence. Obviously, with the start of the movement, Jacques Fresco is a pivotal influence on all of this, and that's obvious. And then you track Jacques Fresco. We'll take this on a case-by-case basis. Let's assume that Jacques Fresco was the only influence. Who influenced Jacques Fresco? Well, there's a massive spectrum of people that influenced Jacques Fresco. Who influenced, say, Buckminster Fuller, who obviously influenced Jacques Fresco? There's an enormous number of people. You have to really harness the train of thought and start to navigate the relationships. If you read books a lot, this is what I did. All the books I read, I look at who they source, and then I read their books. And like an enormous tree, you branch out with every book. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of time. I'm working on my speed reading course. But that's how I do it. I read books and I reference their sources, because everyone's interlinked in the group mind. No one's originating anything on their own. That's a very important thing for people to understand, too.
Do you have a bibliography?
I wish I did, actually. That's something that will be in the new orientation guide that we're putting together. I don't have one at the moment. It's so enormous, though, the bibliography, that it's really daunting. And it's almost kind of a waste of time after a certain point, because I've read so many things, I get to the end, I'm like, well, that was easy enough to surmise, because people write things for different purposes and different motivations, to sell things. You find an author that's written 25 books, odds are they're repeating themselves a lot just for the sake of having an industry there. So little caveats there. I wish I could give you a better answer, but ultimately the new orientation is specifically designed to go through a point-by-point reference, and each essay, which will be about 40 that comprise the whole thing, will have denotated sources that are most relevant based on my research, and then the rabbit hole goes from there.
So we'll be able to kind of go down the rabbit hole from getting to the source.
My whole goal with the new source guide is, the whole goal of the new source guide is multidimensional. It's not only just as an orientation, it's also to give a gateway to the information sourced in it, to represent. So, the worst thing is to read a book that has no sources. I try to be more crazy than that. And then to also enable people to build up on this and it to be obvious enough where they can begin to communicate it very easily. So I'm trying to reduce how heady I can be sometimes, and really break that language down so it's more comprehensible.
I would just say, once you get that list, maybe make a personal challenge to try to find something not on it that also applies. Just so that you're branching out and having other things to contribute.
Well, reading something now that I think applies that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Well, and in the meantime, there's a reading list that we have going too. It's got lists a bunch of books and research material.
And where is that?
It's on the Zeitgeist Movement website. It's on the state site. It's linked in a lot of the state sites that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say in conclusion of it, the source is inside all of us here. Go back, go to the website, go to everything Jason said. As PJ said, go back and look at all the information that's there, and then really just think about it. Okay, and the source will just start flowing out of you, and you will just start perceiving and understanding the world in a different way like you never did before. I know that Joe of 1994 wouldn't even recognize or be able to have a conversation with the Joe of 2012. So where did that come from? Yes, I read books. Yes, I listened to different things or what have you. But really where it came from was my ability to start critically asking questions about things that are in front of me that I deal with every day. And you'll begin to see incredible inefficiencies, and everything that we're talking about here suddenly just
crystallizes and makes so much sense, and you feel inspired to tell others about it. So the source, I know, is inside all of you. You're all geniuses, you're all very intelligent. You've just been in a system that isn't, and so it's time to turn it on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much to the panel and for the presentations for this evening. Just briefly, read. You'll find most of the time it'll validate what you already know, which I think is what Joe was saying. Don't forget to keep an eye on the website for the media festival that's going to be coming out in August, and some other events in Los Angeles going around. And as Jason said, the state site has a link to all the local activist chapters for whatever's going on in your neighborhood if you want to check it out there. Thank you so much.